I would like to welcome you all here this evening, and obviously as I mentioned, I was hoping for a bigger turnout tonight. We've had lots of consultations over the last year as a result of the Rural Summit, so perhaps that's playing a role. So I want to thank you guys for taking time out of your evening to come and discuss the budget. I also want to thank the City of Ottawa's Chief Financial Officer, Cyril Rogers, for being here tonight. And as a guy who grew up in rural Newfoundland, I know that coming out to our rural community is one of his favorites during budget season. So welcome, Cyril and team. I don't know everybody's name, my apologies. Budgets are obviously one of, if not the most important thing that council discusses every year. Budgets are where rubber hits the road, so to speak. We can draft all of the policies we want and do all the studies we want and designs we want, but until there's money put aside in the budget for it, it's just an idea in a binder that collects dust on a shelf. With so many pressures on the city and competing priorities, hearing from residents directly really helps me in terms of what I decide to advocate for and what I ask for at budget season. What am I hearing leading up to the budget? Much of this will be familiar. Paramedics. So as your councillor, I remain concerned about paramedic response times. I'm happy to see that there is a plan to hire more paramedics. This has been something that's been getting some attention. Earlier in this year, I moved a motion to bring back reporting of rural response times, which hadn't been done since the province decided no longer to make this a requirement. I think about a decade ago that happened. So I look forward to some good news on this front coming soon, I hope. So I believe Cyril might talk about it tonight, I'm not 100% sure, but it sounds to me like over the course of the next two budgets, there is a plan to hire 46 FTEs, which should take some pressure off the paramedic service. And while I'm on emergency services, I do continue to hear about OPS, lack of presence in our ward, and responses to calls for police assistance. So I will be supporting the asks that the Ottawa Police have at budget time, and I will be continuing to advocate for more of a presence in West Carleton-March. I will take this opportunity to let you know that over the last year, under the leadership of the new chief, I guess he's not that new anymore, but Chief Stubbs has taken the police in a bit of a different direction, and that's more towards a district model of policing, which is something that we used to use in the City of Ottawa many years ago. Have shifted to different models over numerous years. But an example of how that is going to help West Carleton. So in the district model, there'll be a little bit of everything throughout the city. Right now, all speeding enforcement, or previous to the switch to the district model, all speeding enforcement happened out of Leitrim. So they didn't make it out here a lot because they're pulling people over on the way because that's their job. So that's a long drive from Leitrim to West Carleton in part of a work day. Ditches and drainage, that's a real issue in our ward. I don't think it's a stretch to say that that is the #1 reason for calls to my office is for ditching requests and follow up on service requests that perhaps never got actioned. I think there are a lot of factors at play there, and multiple departments involved in the response. But of course, the financial aspect of that is real as well. So I'll be advocating for a plan as well as additional funds for ditching and drainage issues in our ward. This will also be a key topic at the upcoming Rural Summit and the report that will follow. Roads. What would a Ward 5 budget consultation be without some discussion about roads? So the Ward 5 resurfacing budget last year was about $6 million more than the year before. I will obviously be fighting for at least that amount this year. And I think something I'd like to mention is that the provincial government has recently announced $50 million for rural road renewal over the next 3 years. So when I have conversations with Cyril, I'm going to ask him to make sure that we're not spending less as a city on roads, that we're spending what we always spend in addition to what we're receiving from the province for road renewal. Even with that, I think we've got a large deficit in terms of our road infrastructure to make up for. And 311 service. So just today I met with staff, including Cyril, about the 311 system. This is a very important part of how the city functions and how it serves your needs. However, long wait times, lack of communication do continue to frustrate people who use 311. This means people stop using it or call my office for follow-ups. It also sometimes means multiple service requests for the same thing from the same person, which can cause further issues and delays. So I'm happy to see that review is underway. And of course, there are many more issues that I'm sure you'll want to discuss and that we'll want to deal with through budget time. Yeah, so I also want to talk about the Rural Summit a little bit before I stop. So many of the issues that you're going to raise tonight and many of the issues that people have been talking about for years, months, weeks, will be discussed on November 2nd. And I would invite any of you who haven't signed up to come to the Rural Summit to do so. If you need assistance with that, just flag me down and we'll make it happen. So thanks again for being here tonight and for your dedication to your community, to the democratic process. Obviously, there's only a few of you who are extremely dedicated enough to come out to a budget consultation, and I very much appreciate that. So thank you again for your time this evening. I will pass it over to Cyril now, who will do a quick presentation on the draft budget that's coming up, and we will open it up to you guys for your questions, comments, and anything that you want to say about the 2025 budget. Thank you very much.
What I would encourage is, I think you all have a copy, is if you do have a question on that slide, just raise your hand. That way we can stop and address questions that way to make it a little bit more interactive. That works for you guys in the audience. So the intent is basically to walk you through last 2 or 3 years. We've been trying to be more informative and try and educate how the budget works. You need to appreciate it's a very, very complex budget. You're talking about $5 to $6 billion a year when you look at the operating budget and the capital investments. Very complex in terms of the funding sources. Property taxation is about 50% of our revenue, so 50% of our income comes from the property tax base. That's all properties in terms of commercial, residential, etc. The other 50%, a big chunk of that comes from our user fees. So that's your utility bills from a water perspective. I know a lot of the residents in this area don't have a water bill because you're not connected. But your transit fares, your recreational fees over there, that would be considered a user fee. On our social services programs, we do have a lot of programs that are funded from the province. So that's a lot of what we call funding that flows through us. We administer the programs on their behalf. So again, the property tax base is basically 50% of the income. The other 50% comes from a merit of different income streams. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the presentation. I'll pass it over to Sarah to go through the presentation. Again, stop us if you do have a question to do a page flip. Okay?
Capital budget ranges from anywhere from 750 million to $1 billion. It's always, capital tends to be a bit more cyclical, just because of, if you look at the past couple of years, we've had significant investments in stage 1, stage 2 LRT. We've had a Sophie library, so those big time one-off projects tend to give us a little bit of a blip, but we tend to trend around that 750 million plus, depending on big ticket items, one-offs.
More or less.
More or less, yeah.
Sure. We could go to the next slide on funding sources. So again, we'll start on the left-hand side. 50% of the funding sources for the operating budget comes from annual property taxes and payment taxes, which are essentially property taxes on federal government. The remaining 50% comes from user fees and charges, which includes your water bill, transit fares, port fees at recreational facilities, like swimming or state lessons. And the remainder comes from provincial federal funding. And this is largely for social services programs the city delivers on behalf of the province and includes funding for a portion of our permanent services. Moving over to the right-hand side, the capital budget funding sources, which pays for our infrastructure, including new roads, buildings, and sidewalks, are made up of approximately half from users. So this is similar to a homeowner that would set aside savings for a number of years to do a kitchen renovation in the future, and then draws on those savings to complete the renovation. At the city, we have various reserves restricted for certain uses. An example,
yeah, that's a good question. So the reserves, that must come from money that has come in year over year. So you're taking a little bit, I guess, from the money that comes in and putting it in the reserves, and then you take it out from the, thanks.
How much are you sitting on in reserves?
Right now, don't quote me on the exact number, but overall our total reserves are roughly around 500 million. So we have 26 different reserves, and different reserves have different rules in terms of how we can use it. The most important reserve I would call would be the tax, what we refer to as the tax stabilization reserve. And that reserve is a savings account that we put to the side for to address any deficits in a given year when the fiscal year is done. So as an example, we have to balance our budget. Winter operations is a good example. We obviously do a winter operations budget based on 3 to 5 year historical patterns. 2 years ago, the winter operations deficit was around $26 million. So the tax stabilization reserve was there to use if we needed to use it. Now the other side of the equation is, I always say we're extremely fiscally responsible, despite what some people may think. When we get through the first half of the winter season in the fiscal year, so your January through April, if we have a very harsh winter, we implement discretionary spending freezes, hiring freezes, et cetera, and 2 years ago when we did have a $26 million deficit, we were able to fund that deficit through all those savings throughout the year, and we didn't touch that tax stabilization reserve. That balance today is at $100 million. The recommended council approved policy suggests that that balance should be around 57 million. So we've been carrying a higher balance. Mainly, again, 2 different reasons. Going through a pandemic, we didn't have to use it because the province and the feds did have a lot of COVID funding. But we've been able to build that reserve up to a nice, I don't want to say a cushion, but it's certainly creating a strong position in terms of helping us address any one-off things that might come in the pipeline. The other side of the equation is because of our strong reserve balances, our credit rating, so we do have a strong credit rating from our agencies. So we have a AA plus and a AAA credit rating. And what that means is we can issue debt on our capital assets at a very low interest rate. So our rates are actually almost on par with the province. So we have a very, very strong borrowing rate, which helps us invest into core infrastructure at a lower cost. So we get really good rates, but we have a strong cash position, so that enables us to leverage more money to go further in that respect. So a little bit of a long-winded answer to your question.
So you're saying that you're carrying about 500 million in reserves at this point?
Yeah.
And we're spending 750 per billion a year.
Yeah.
So you've got like 6 months worth of cash.
No, you're just looking at the capital side. So
yes.
When you look at our true $5 billion budget, we have over $2 billion of annual cash that comes in from property taxes. Then we have another.
No, I'm listening, but it doesn't sound like a lot of reserves. The other thing we talked about is taking on debt. Do we have very much debt?
So right now, there's going to be a long answer. Right now, the province municipal legislation states that a municipality is allowed to have up to 25% of a debt servicing ratio. So basically 25% of your income can be allocated to debt. This council has reduced that to 7.5%, which is very, very conservative. We actually run below 5%. So we do have, I think it's just over $2 billion in debt.
2 billion or billion?
Billion.
2 billion in debt.
But our asset value is 30 billion.
So what the CEO inside the evidence.
Yeah, so that would be equivalent to, I think the stat we use is basically, it's like having a $25,000 mortgage on a $500,000 house.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of equity in our assets, if you look at it that way.
But we've still got 2 billion, so we pay interest on that. So that's.
Yeah.
So are they looking at drawing more debt down?
So we continue, what you've seen in the past 5 years, you'll see in the next 3 or 4 years, our debt is going up, and the main driver is the LRT.
No, I understand. That's why I was asking you to say we're only spending less than $1 billion a year. I'm going, well, hold on, we've been spending more than that on LRT for the last 7 years.
Yeah, when I say $1 billion, the 2024 capital budget was $1 billion. LRT was approved in 2020. So that's stage 2 is 4.8 billion.
That would have been in the 2019 budget.
Okay, but, and when we borrow money to pay for it.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
And the other question was, I know I was reading the mayor saying that we've got this good shortfall, hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, how's that going to affect the budget? If that money doesn't come in from the profits, that's going to totally wipe out your reserves.
So what the mayor's committed to with the fairness campaign is, so effectively in the city of Ottawa, we are paying over 50% of the cost of the train.
I understand that.
So when you go in, so just for context for the others,
Okay.
in Toronto, the province pays 100% of the cost of transit. So there's an imparity there. So what the direction that we've been given from council is to build the budget with a big range. So the tax increase is 2.9, but for transit, it's 2.9 to 37%. Its fare increase of 2.5, 75%. There's a lot of different levers that we've been tasked to build the budget for transit. So when we table the budget in 3 weeks' time, we'll define what levers we decide to pull and how much of the lever we decide to pull. So the tax increase should be higher than 2.9 for transit. The fare increase for transit could be higher than 2.5. That's what you'll see in the table budget.
Can I follow up? So
Yeah.
when it comes to transit, the tax increase would be, that would be collected on the transit levy and property taxes, so Ward 5 does not pay the transit levy.
No, I appreciate that. From a city point of view, we've got a big hopes. But,
Yes, for transit, yes, 100%.
and it sounds like you're not a reserve. You're talking about the $100 million stretch you've got in a reserve, but you got a $290 million hole. You still, you're aggressively short.
Yeah. Taxes will only be one of the levers that have to increase if we don't get money from the federal or provincial governments.
Okay, thank you.
Wondering the reserves, $500 million. Last 5 years, what has been the trend on that, right?
So we've been moving around 450. We did peak up just over 600 in 2022 timeframe. So when the pandemic hit, we basically paused a lot of our construction. So one of the mitigation strategies that we went for the council endorsed was to do a lot of capital deferrals. So we wanted to pick up our reserves just because we didn't know how many years of funding would be coming from the province and the feds. Luckily, we were, again, being very diligent. We came through that pretty much in a strong position. In 2023 and 2024, all the capital deferrals that we put in place in 2021 and 2022, we put back into play. So there's a little bit of a narrative sometimes when you go back to the history of the reserves going back to 2020. The narrative is that this term of council has depleted the reserves. This term of council has not depleted the reserves. We built the reserves up because we did deferrals. So we didn't move forward with a number of capital projects. In 2023 or 2024, as we came out of the pandemic, we went back and did those projects. So we built it up just to see it come back down. But we're always in that 450 to 500 level of reserves.
So in the most part, it's steady state.
Yes.
Okay.
I have one. So with something operational like snow, so you have a year with a lot of snow, you go 25 million over the budget. On a year like last year, I don't think we got a ton of snow last year, it would have been lighter on the budget. Does that money get put into, like if you don't spend the whole budget, does it then get put into reserves, or what do you do with the money that's not spent?
So the year in this position, like in the last 10 years, I think 8 or 9 of the years we've been into a surplus, and surplus ranging from 5 to 15 to 25 million. Typically that money goes back into the tax stabilization reserve. I'm going to be frank, so the councillors like to take that money and spend it. My recommendation is always to put it back into the reserve to make it more, to build up our savings account. So that's where it typically goes.
But I want to say that it worked out.
Okay, so,
Good question, by the way.
I'll just quickly touch on, we did have a little bit of a debt, so of course our funding sources for capital come from debt. And Cyril has mentioned that there is an overall issue for debt. So the municipal high group limits that amount to 25% of our own sources of revenue. But then the city's fiscal framework then limits that further down to 7.5%. And as Gerald said, we're closer to around 5%. So well below our municipal requirement. Sources comes from development charges. So these are charges paid by developers who are constructing subdivision or homes. Portion of that charge is then allocated to account to pay for the infrastructure of those municipalities, including roads, parks, water, and wastewater infrastructure. So we'll go to the next slide. The city has 3 separate tax levies, with one part of the property tax bill. There's the citywide tax levy, the transit levy, which is applicable in this work, and the food services levy. You can see how this will be broken down on the second page of your property tax bill. The citywide tax levy funds things like good operations and recreational programs, whereas the transit and food services levy have to be used exclusively for those respective services. And then the fourth component is our rates for the budget, which is our water, wastewater, and stormwater facilities. Revenue collected under those user fees have to be used exclusively to support those programs. So, most of the city's programs and services are funded by annual property taxes, which are referred to as tax-supported services, and are funded by the citywide tax levy under property tax bill. Examples of tax-supported programs and services include roads and winter maintenance, parks, recreational programs, libraries, and public health, etc. It's important to note that some of the tax-supported programs receive provincial money. For example, public health is funded 75% of the province and 25% from the city. Paramedics is funded 50-50 from the province and the city. And community and social services such as long-term care, housing, and social services vary funded by program.
So with regard to paramedics then, if we're hiring more paramedics, half of that will be paid by the municipality and half of it.
Yeah. There's a couple programs in paramedics that are 100% by the province. We have a couple neonatal birthing units and a couple other programs. CARE's done a phenomenal job advocating for paramedics and doing a lot of work. So we need to kind of the forefront of getting additional funding for paramedics, but for the most part, the safety figures.
So you said you're hiring 43 paramedics, right?
So we went forward, or the city went forward with a report in 2023. So traditionally in the past couple of budget cycles in terms of council, paramedics have grown by 14 paramedics per year, 12 to 14 per year was down to the baseline. Coming out of the pandemic, the service just changed. The need for paramedics just went this way. So we went forward with a growth plan in 2023 where I think in 23 we hired 28, 2024 we might have hired 24. And this budget coming up is got between 23 and 27 on the docket. So we basically almost doubled the annual normal that we see pre-pandemic.
And the province has signed off on the funding, like they've secured it already?
Yes.
Okay.
Now that I as I sighed when I asked that.
Now, there is a challenge with that in terms of like that's done every year, right? You have to, so you can't rely on it for more than what they've given you already.
Oh, I
Because you got to go back every year now.
And just quickly, sorry, public health, legislatively it's 75 province, 25 municipality. It's more in that 60-40, 65-35, in which we are doing more than the province. Again, the province is committing to do a formal, we call it funding review in 2025. So all municipalities are faced with the same issue. For some reason, Ottawa tends to be on the bottom of all the metrics when it comes to provincial funding. So there's a commitment from the province to relook at the Ottawa public health funding allocation because we have, we filled some of the gap of that required.
slide. So the transit services budget. The Councillor City fiscal framework says the transit fares cover 55% of the operating costs, and the remaining 45% comes from the transit tax levy. Transit services also receive funding through the provincial and federal gas tax. The city's transit services falls under the authority of transit commissions and include services provided by OC Transpo, Transpo, and the city LRT. For the police services budget, the police services tax levy funds the operating and capital budget of that service. And this budget falls under the authority of the Police Services Board. And we can go to the next slide. The city's water, wastewater, and stormwater services are funded through a separate user fee charged to residents on their bi-monthly water bill or as a fee on a property tax bill. These programs and services are referred to as rate supported services. These are very capital-intensive programs, with a lot of the infrastructure being underground, making it much more expensive to repair itself. Therefore, a large portion of these revenues are derived towards the capital programs for the surface area. Examples of rate supported programs and services include drinking water purification, delivery of water, collection and treatment of wastewater, stormwater management, and water meter installation. The budget for the city's rate supported services falls under the authority of the Environment and Climate Change Committee and is also directed by the council-approved rate long-range branch plan.
This quick question regarding the rate support budget. In our board bet, back when the surplus was announced, said that water consumption also contributed a amount of snow, like live snow.
Yeah.
Can you explain how the water rates could contribute to the surplus?
Yes, so the water surplus is part of the rate surplus. So what happened is, as we went into the pandemic and everyone shifted from working in the office to working from home, we have different pricing for our tiers. So tier for commercial buildings. So basically our revenue for commercial businesses went this way. So as we were recalibrating that throughout the pandemic, in 2022 and 2024, we continued to rebuild that budget forecast back up. So what we're seeing is the consumption at the upper tiers, commercial buildings, come back to where it almost was before pandemic. So we've been slowly building the budget back to forecasts, and that's why you're seeing that increase.
So at the higher tier, it doesn't necessarily cost the city more money, but it's just more there to promote on the preservation.
Well, it does technically cost more because they're bigger pipes.
Oh, okay.
So from a real basic perspective, they have a bigger pipe going to a large compact building, so it does cost a bit more. That's why the pricing is tiered a little bit higher.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Thanks.
We'll go to the next slide. So the municipal act allows municipalities to impose fees and charges to cover the cost of delivering services. Revenues generated are used to offset the cost of providing the goods or service. Examples of legal fees and charges include transit fares, recreational programs, facility and arena rentals, building and parking permits, etc. You go to the next slide. So moving on to section 2, budget process and development, we'll go through the budget process and how the budget is developed. The Canadian budget structure, 2025 budget enhancements, the term of council priorities, and the 2025 budget needs schedule. It's important to note that the budget isn't a one-time event that occurs each year and occurs year-round by way of legislative reports and elections and city council. Residents also have the opportunity to provide feedback to their respective councillors at various committees throughout the year. We'll go to the next slide. On budget process. So this slide provides a high-level overview of that formal budget process. Beginning with public engagements, which were kicked off in July. Then the budget directions were endorsed and approved by council on September 18th. This provided direction to staff to complete building a detailed budget for tabling on November 13th. Following that, each respective budget committee will rise each respective committee budget will rise to that committee for deliberations. And then finally, on December 11th, the 2025 budget is adopted. Now we'll go to the next slide. So just to recap, and Sarah touched on who we already, the following budget directions were approved by Council on September 18th. A tax levy increase of no more than 2.9% for all city services, excluding transit. And as discussed for transit, the direction provided was really setting a range by setting a tax levy minimum of 2.9 and an upper limit of 37%. And this relates back to the fairness campaign that was endorsed by Council. In addition to this, there are various levers to be considered, including fare increases and cost containment strategies. These are being reviewed by the Long Range Planning Working Group, and they'll propose the recommended strategy on November 3rd. Combined, the rate program, including water, wastewater, and stormwater, increased 4.4%. User fees and charges will increase to allow for cost recovery as per the municipal act. And we'll also factor in the additional revenue sources or efficiencies found through the service review framework endorsed by the City Council. Go to the next slide. So another component of the budget process is public engagement. Opportunities for residents to share feedback include contacting the board councillor, online engagement during Engage Ottawa, councillor-led public consultations like today's session, social media posts, advertisements at city facilities, and watching a promotional video of how to engage on the city budget. And we'll go to the next slide. The city's draft budget is tabled in council on November 13th. You'll notice the draft budgets for Ottawa Public Health, Ottawa Public Library, and Ottawa Police Services are tabled at their respective boards, leading up to the citywide budget tabling. The city's budget is organized by standing committee and is reviewed by that committee, which includes the operating and capital budget for the city's programs and services under the mandate. After all standing committees have reviewed and made their recommendations regarding the draft budgets, council reviews and votes on the city's final budget for adoption on December 11th. We'll go to the next slide. So this chart on the very same is an example of the service area budgets reviewed by that committee. It also shows below the respective dates of those standing committee meetings. This is where residents have the opportunity to come out and speak in public delegation at those committee meetings. At each of these committee meetings, the committee can either approve, disapprove, or make changes to their respective budgets that would then rise to council for adoption on December 11th. Next slide.
So does each committee have a budget that they actually review and set?
Yes. Yeah. So what we do is we tabled a massive budget, it's everything, and then each respective budget is broken down by committee. So the committee, that budget goes to committee, and then that committee votes on that budget, and they recommend, typically they recommend that budget to council as a whole. And then on December 11th, that's where the council can approve or disapprove each respective budget if they choose to.
So, for example, like one of the commissioners that ALAC, so what sort of budget would they have that we're going to vote on? Do they get a vote on operational issues?
Yeah.
Capital issues?
There's an operational budget and a capital component. So specific things to ALAC is there. On the capital side, you would see a lot of the culverts in the rural area. They're planning capital work for culverts. Off the top of my head, it's relatively small.
Rural drainage.
Yeah.
And maybe the rural office.
Yeah, the rural office budget would go there.
Okay. So, if we want to review what the different things are, how would we go about doing that?
So so right now all the budgets are online from 2024 prior. Once we table a budget on November 13th, the documents become live and accessible online. There's also paper documents that will be at the service centers out here in the libraries. So you can go through there, and the book, if you have a physical book, it's about 1,000 pages, and everything is broken down by committee. So each tab's got a committee name,
and you'll see those respective services in that respective committee book. And you'll see details there in the operating budget. And if you look at the capital, it actually breaks it down by award and actually gives the road location as an example. So if you're planning on doing road service and moving along this road right here,
Which we're going to want to do this year.
you'll see it there. It's there.
Okay, would that be in the FARAC budget or would that be under transportation?
That one would be transportation right here.
So does each committee get a 2.9%?
No.
Is that every year or do they have to determine who gets to spend the money?
So
How's that determined?
So what we do is once the property tax is 50% of the equation, then there's different committees, different departments have different user fees. And we look at efficiency as well. So I do not allocate 2.9 to each department. What we do is we know that 2.9 will bring in this much new revenue. We know that 2.9% increase on user fees will bring in this much revenue. And then we work with all the departments to see, okay, what are your priorities when we look at the various long-range financial plans. We know that, we are a collective bargaining organization, so we know that we need agreements, the salaries will increase by X amount. So we start, allocating money for the known. So we know that salary costs will go up by X. We know that our contracts get inflation on it for X. We know that our water bill will go up by X. We know that our utilities will go up by X. So finance kind of takes, all the new money coming in, then we take off the requirements, and then we go down through all that list, and then of course departments come through with what I deem as their wish list in terms of new spending they want to do. And then that's where we go through a very onerous process of review after review with departments, GMs. Can't afford that. Is this a priority? Why do you want, what direction do you get from council to do this new initiative? And that's where you kind of get into the balance. So we don't allocate a percentage, we do it at a global level.
For council priorities.
Determine council priorities is another initiative that we look at as well as terms of money.
Okay.
So, this is a question about, what might happen with the next year. So, we're having a rural summit meeting on November the 2nd, and presumably some action items will come out of that. My guess is that those would be worked into the following budget, or it's a possibility that councillors have thought about some of those things already, and so some of those would have been discussed and would be addressed in the current budget. Is that
My expectation would be both.
both?
In terms of what's feasible, obviously the real summit is, 2 weeks before we table, so it's getting
Sure.
pretty tight, but I'm expecting that there will be all the real summit that way as well, and there's some
Okay.
discussions with their councillors in the mayor's office, so I would expect a bit of both.
There's been conversations going on for a better part of a year. I expect there will be some deliverables in the first year. And like Cyril said, I think there'll be other things that take longer.
Take home. Okay, thanks.
So you're going to put those things into your budget for a year?
Not technically, no.
Okay, but that's your intention is to work those things.
Not all of them in the first year, of course, but
Okay.
Okay, we'll move on to the 2025 budget enhancements. So this is based on feedback received since the 2024 budget. The goals of these enhancements is to improve budget literacy and engagement. So some of the enhancements include the critical briefing and our 2025 draft budget explorer. This is a web-based and interactive tool with enhanced reporting capabilities, which really allows you to navigate the budget details more easily online. The goal of these enhancements is to create a better understanding of the investments being made across our services and programs that serve our community. Next slide. The 2025 draft budget will be aligned with our general council priorities, which are a city that has affordable housing is more livable for all, a city that is more connected with reliable, safe, and accessibility mobility options, a city that is green and resilient, and a city with a diversified and prosperous economy. You'll notice the icons on the slide are used throughout the budget lines to highlight investments in these areas. And that concludes our presentation.
Question, you say this draft West Explorers, when's that been popular? November?
Yeah, so in this year was the first time where we put our budget fully automated online. And what you see this time is enhanced that tool. So we're aiming to add that up by November the 15th. So we table on the 15th.
Yeah.
And we're hoping to add that data up and live by Friday. I kid you not, typically for Tuesday night, there's been years where I've been in print shop in the parking garage at City Hall. I've been there at midnight on Tuesday printing the beast of the budget for tabling Wednesday morning. So it comes down to the wire. Literally, the print staff are still there till 2, 3 a.m. in the morning putting all the numbers together. So a little bit of a tight jam to get that with that.
First of all, thank you for holding me. Don't be discouraged by the numbers.
Oh, it filled out a little bit.
And go back, we've been to many of these over the last 10 years, and we've had as few as 5, so also not bad. I want to make just a general comment. We're going to have to unfortunately leave soon because we have to be in Carleton-March. But I may be in the minority of taxpayers, but I'm more concerned that 2.9% is not enough of an increase, than that is too much. And I guess we're always concerned with efficiency, and everybody gets some oil, but we need to reduce our taxes. But then I recently traveled to Scandinavia and visited 3 large capital cities, Stockholm, Oslo, and Copenhagen. So as you probably know, the highest tax rates in the world, about any measure of happiness, satisfaction, livability, they score the highest. So lowering taxes and getting a small little tax increase isn't necessarily going to make us, with budget goals of livability and satisfaction and homelessness. We traveled for 17 days, and I think over 17 days I saw 4 people that I thought might be homeless. I would find 4 homeless people within 17 minutes, almost downtown on the stairs. If you need a home, you're provided with a home. They have excellent educational things that are beyond the city. But I just wonder, do you guys ever have the chance to visit other capital cities, large capital cities, such as Europe? It doesn't necessarily have to be Europe. But other people have dealt with some of our big issues. We're dealing with such big, serious, scary issues. And I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. I think other cities, the transit that we saw is jaw-droppingly efficient, comprehensive, inexpensive, wonderful, excellent transit services. And the city roads do not have cars on them. We saw delivery trucks, bicycles, taxis. The congestion just isn't there. Anyway, I just wonder if you ever have the chance to draw on others' experiences rather than we just seem to be scratching our heads and not coming up with solutions that are outside the box of what we're already doing. That's my concern.
I mean, we have an extensive consultation network across the country in all of our services, in the province and the country. There's a big network from CFOs, there's a big network of city planners. That's all there. I hear you, I've traveled quite a bit, but now on the city dime, on my own personal dime. And the first thing I notice when I go to different cities is that I really do certain things different versus us. The structure is really different. The challenge is when you dig deep into the overall tax structure, there is quite a few significant differences. It doesn't mean that we can't do that. It just means there's provincial and federal things that are different here that we're governed by versus over there. It's not an excuse. It would take a monumental task to change the structure at all 3 levels, to be frank, right? That's the challenge. If you go anywhere in Europe, the transit system in Europe is big outright.
I would also add, comparing the city of Ottawa, even to other Canadian cities, and sometimes see how you see things, like even Toronto, so much more dense and so much more populated, that it's, I would think it's easier to deliver services in a city like that. Like if you think about transit, how close it is, how dense it is, people can just walk out of their building and walk to the nearest stop. Whereas in a city as big as Ottawa and as sprawled as Ottawa, I think it's a lot more challenging to make that work.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor, but our light rail track system on stage 2 is up. I think we have 56 kilometers of track. In Toronto, I think there are 5 different lines are roughly around the same number of track. So it's that density that really drives the efficiencies.
Right, I go your comment saying that I'm part of that minority as well. I personally don't think campaign office is getting paid on just property tax increases or lack of, until you do a deep dive into how troubled everything is, as we've seen. We don't even have to go to Europe to compare what our cities look like compared to them. We can go to American cities where you can see the exact opposite of how the lack of infrastructure, the sprawl is killing a lot of American cities are now run by HOAs because they see the short-term gain of paying money to an HOA to do services, owners associations. So basically all the services, the sewer, everything like that is run by a private corporation. So they just wait until they pass away, and then there's not their problem because infrastructure, sewage, roads, and whatnot only need to be addressed every generation or so, if I'm not mistaken, right? But to that, yes, density is a big thing, but our urban planning right now is just planning for more sprawl, more single homes, more sprawl that can't support itself with the tax revenue generates based on what infrastructure it requires to support it. So is there a direction that, like, I know we live in North Lawn, we're not going to get the services in the city, and I've come to terms with that. I understand that. We're not going to get the same services, we're not going to get the response time, and that's fine. What we need to do is encourage the city poor and the city proper itself to spend the money more efficiently. So build denser urban planning, build things more walkable so you can have a rail line that supports multiple stops instead of being one stop every blue moon because everyone wants to see
And so I said on the planning and housing committee, so tomorrow we have a meeting, I'm sure we'll approve several developments that are along, key or projected to be key transportation corridors. So, but we also have to react to what is being, like, developers are applying for permits, right? And we go through the process of reviewing it and saying yes or no. So we have to review where they're applying and what they're applying for. So we have Ottawa Community Housing, which is a not-for-profit housing provider, which take some actual action to provide those units for people. But, and of course, I'm not trying to skirt the city's responsibility in this, and I agree with you, but I also think much of the problem in terms of sprawl and development practices and how we grow as a city is actually coming from the province. So I was very much looking forward to, and that's why I signed up to be on the planning council committee. If you go back and look at my campaign platform, talk a lot about doing development differently, making sure it's more livable, that there are more trees, that they don't just scorch the earth and then build and replant trees, and I'm learning a lot about that process. But the provincial policy statements, the ability to expand the urban boundary with an application in between reviews of the official plan, and how the process of applying and being approved for developments is mostly driven by the province, and we're simply reacting to provincial policy statements as the planning acts. It is discouraging.
Could we not then incentivize denser building practices? So, not necessarily condos, because in Toronto, condos are not working as well, but just, triplexes.
Yeah.
4-unit homes, 5-unit homes kind of thing. instead of small, like, all I see is every time I drive by that March Road development, I can't understand the logic that went into building so many homes there, with hundreds. You know, what was a swamp, so they had to build 100 meter by 100 meter retaining pond. And it's still one lane that I can wait.
Oh, I live it every day.
The poor bastards that have to walk into town for flight. And on the city map, it's listed as a paved shoulder. That is generous.
If you go back and watch the last 5 planning and housing committee meetings, I will raise that in every single one of them.
There's not even a light there. People
Yeah.
slam on the bridge.
And I'll let Cyril perhaps comment on this, because I'm not an expert on it, he might not be either, but the way we collect development charges, when they're collected, plays a big role in our ability to expand the infrastructure. But I 100% agree with you that we have to find a way to make the infrastructure keep up with the pace of development.
And to touch on it, is it this budget or was it last budget where Bill Homes Taxer bill, where we saw development charges get decreased by the province? Is it affecting this upcoming budget or was it last budget where it came into effect?
So we haven't seen a reduction. I think that bill might have been rescinded.
Oh, okay.
I think the World Planning Committee, there's nothing on the development charge background study.
Yeah, we actually raised development charges a couple months ago.
Yep.
So, yeah, development charges account for last year, what, 14%?
Yeah.
Okay. And the province is looking to reduce that.
Just wait 2 weeks, they'll change it again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Question on roads, you mentioned there's additional money coming from the province. Is that a one-time? Perpetuity?
So it was announced several months ago. You'll remember a trip that Doug Ford made to Ottawa. There was a big to-do about it. He made a bunch of announcements. It was $500 million for the city of Ottawa. Part of that was $50 million for rural road renewal over the next 3 years. So they're keeping us loyal to the next election, essentially.
Yeah, so part of that, yes, I can add a little more things. So part of that was in November, December of 2023, the province inked the several $1 billion deal with the city of Toronto. We began advocating with the province that we deserve our own deal, because we are unique. That was very successful. That was a very heavy lift. Myself, city manager's chief of staff, basically in 6 weeks. We were successful negotiating a $543 million deal with the province to basically help the city, recognize the city of Ottawa is unique in terms of we're the largest geographical municipality in North America. We have our unique challenges in terms of the rural presence in the municipals of the city of Ottawa. We are the nation's capital, so we're hit harder by federal policy decisions than any other city in Canada. So the province recognized that, and they were able to, agree to funding us for our unique and economic challenges. A lot of that money did go into the downtown core in terms of revitalizing downtown Butler Market. But we were very, very successful in getting $50 million for rural roads, recognizing the presence of rural Ottawa. It's not known by the big city of Toronto.
Supplemental question. We've been funding roads a lot by incremental funding for the last several years. The solution has to be a better recognition of the requirement for funding for roads, and that has to come out of a long-range financial plan. So specifically, when is the next long-range financial plan going to be presented?
June or July of 2025. So that the last plan was formed in 2018, and we had a funding strategy to close that gap by 2026. We're on track to do that. There's been a lot of years of incremental one-time funding, but we build the base at the same time. In 2020, the province came up with new legislation from an asset management perspective, and part of that new legislation required every municipality in the province to come back by June of 2022 with core asset management plans. By June of 2023, or 2024, this year, sorry, all other asset management plans, and then by July of 2025, we updated funding. So that's what we'll bring back. By July, we updated the tax support plan, which is the goals.
What does a resident have to do to be able to express interest in the long-range financial plan so you can be kept up to date? Because it hasn't worked well in the past.
So the best avenue is we tabled the asset management plans in May of this year. So this, I don't think you were there, maybe. I don't recall seeing your translation committee in May.
No, he slacked this year.
That would have been a good opportunity. So of course, coming back in June timeframe, whenever we do come forward, we will be out finding the that committee. I don't know if the plan is in any consultation or not, but it will be. I'm sure Councillor will be.
Can we register on Engage Ottawa?
Yeah. So every committee meeting, you can register online, or you can, if you want to go to the plan tomorrow morning, you can show up and register around the slot. But your best bet is to, a lot of people think that the budget is fake. For the most part, the ingredients are identified because all the financial plans, the fiscal framework, and policy decisions tells us how much of what we need to go where. So it's very important if you have a concern is to come out during those decisions and those committees to advocate, and then come back during the budget as well. Because whatever goes in the budget is driven largely by those decisions that council made before the budget is stated for the most part.
Just touching up on the road long-term road project. So the way I don't understand it this much. So 2025, we're basically doing a long-term plan on how to fund road infrastructure. So the previous set since 2018, I think you mentioned. How much of that plan went according to plan? And then, so because you mentioned there was a $50 million handout, not handout, but negotiated, but forgive me for using the term, but handout. How many of these type of like one-time funding allotments have been made by the province to help make up the gap if there was a gap?
So in 2018, when we tabled the long-range budget plan, at that point in time, that was for the renewal of infrastructure. There was a $75 million gap on the annual investment of that infrastructure. We had a funding strategy, I think at the time, we were going to close that gap by 2024-ish. Can't remember the exact date. Immediately following that year, that's when the new provincial government came into play. The fourth government came in. The previous government had made a commitment to double the provincial gas tax. So the provincial gas tax is about $39 million a year. In 2018 timeframe, the Liberal government of the province of Bay made a commitment to double that investment starting their next term. They didn't get it. Current premier decided to rescind that. So we immediately had to go back with an updated funding strategy because what we were funding strategy based on, the rules of the game changed. So it always goes back to Councillor Clark comment about the permanent funding. We're always at the mercy of decisions that are made above us, and we have agile fit.
So the province rescinding that tax directly affects.
Yes.
Oh.
So then we had to basically not only did it impact the tax non-financial plans, but also impact the transit plan. The provincial gas tax was a big component of funding the transit plan. So then we had to revise our funding strategy and draw it out a little bit, so we had to close that gap a little bit longer, but still staying on track. So
the city gets points on that, I guess, the revenue from generative gas tax.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's based on percentage and not a commitment of a whole dollar per year.
The federal is based on what they collect, and actually based on transit ownership.
Okay.
The provincial is a little bit more, I'll call it looser in terms of what they allocate, but they did commit to doubling at that point in time, but they didn't double. So we're always at the mercy of
policies.
Like we have, municipalities are very restricted in terms of the revenue source that we can collect taxes on. So we are limited in terms of tools and toolbox. So that's why we need to continue working with the province.
I just assumed they would still fund their commitment and just collect less tax. And you mentioned the feds-based ridership, based on federal ridership.
Yeah. So we've seen a little bit of erosion in our federal gas tax, and something community benefit fund, we doesn't really want, but saw a little bit of erosion. Typically, we get about 58 million or so with better gas tax. I think we're down to about 56 because ridership is a factor of the allocation.
Did they base that on last year's ridership or
Yeah.
next year's projected ridership?
No, last year's. Okay, it's very complex.
Yeah, no, I just, for some reason, didn't realize the scale, because of policy made of the product.
Just wanted to say thank you very much for making a somewhat complex subject somewhat easier to understand. I appreciate it.
Yeah, every time Cyril comes here, I wish he could just hang out. They all have to answer these questions.
Yeah.
Not to throw our name into this, but has there been, the last meeting I went to was regarding the water,
Oh, boy.
yeah, that was entertaining,
Yes.
to say the least.
Quite a bit.
Was there any progress made on that?
Essentially, no, the public consultation period just ended, right?
I think we're getting close to wrapping up on so we did the rural first, then we moved into the urban suburban area. And I was telling this gentleman right here, in my tenure, it's the most extensive consultation that I'm aware of. We actually have well over 30,000 responses to a survey, which is non-biased and survey that everyone can ever run. So we've got lots of great information. So the next step in the process is basically we're committed to come back early in the new year with a report on what we heard. And then by June time frame, recommendations back to committee. And I think we're required to come to ARAC. We want to come to ARAC as well. So previously we just did environment, but last year we actually brought this to ARAC and we had to come back to ARAC as well.
Sorry, ARAC.
The Agriculture and Rural Affairs, that's where the rural areas fall into that committee. So that's how I'm trying to do that.
Regardless of your decisions, revenue neutral, more like the budget.
It could, because it could depend on, right now, the pervious versus impervious is charged. So it could be more of a rate versus a tax component. So it could impact a little bit of the.
But you would just set the rates.
Be 100 million, if I remember correctly, of the funding potentially for the city.
For stormwater, that doesn't ring a bell to me.
Oh. After $10 in raisins. And this one thing, sorry, because I came in a bit late, but the transit levy, because it doesn't affect us in World War V, like you paid property taxes. The city as well. So does that mean the transit levy is about $1,000 now or so? Depending on the household, or I don't know.
Transit levy, we use the average assessed value, which is daily, it's $415,000. That's an assessed value by any time.
Okay.
2060. I think the number for transit is roughly, don't quote me, but I think around $400. So
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. So look at property tax. No, but, so that could potentially increase by
So what?
30%?
The strategy that we put forward was basically, and the basis behind it was, transit over the next 5 years has an annual gap of an average of $140 million. So in order for us to get a direction from council, we had to frame it in a way that, in order to solve that issue just with taxes, with a 37% increase. If we solve it just with fares, it's a 75% increase. If we solve it with service cuts, basis on transit. So we had to basically give that bottom end and top end, so that way we made sure that we had a range to work in, so we know how we dial the levers accordingly.
Gotcha.
Am I going to table budget with 37 transit levy? I think so.
That's like $300-$400, not into $300-$400 annually, right?
It is about $8 per 1%. So I call it 240.
Sorry,
Yeah. Again, on average assessed.
Yes.
I think the transit question, not budget exactly, but my understanding is you're running a transit way up the middle of Arch Road eventually.
So-
Is that actually,
Rapid bus transit, right? So
yeah,
that's,
to service the buildings for Nokia?
yeah, like I think the terminus of that will be like right near McDonald's.
Okay, what's the, I mean, I'm not seeing anything at all yet. What's the timeline?
Oh, like 2046 or something.
So-
It's a long way.
We'll be going back with the transit long-range plan by June as well. And that plan does go to 2046. That's conceptually out there, like that's like out there.
Yeah.
It's a plan, the ultimate, really.
Because, okay, what I heard was that the building was being built and they're going to be given an exception to the normal parking requirements because that transit way was going to be there. I suspect the buildings will be completed long before that transit way. But this is just what I hear from people working Nokia that they, is it true they have far fewer parking requirements in this development where Nokia?
Well, we haven't, did we pass that already?
Yeah, I know they changed the parking, so they had,
Yeah, they moved the part.
they moved the parking, the actual requirements of no rule on that.
Okay, this is, I have friends
We
who work there.
can, we can find it.
Oh, I'm just trying to confirm rumors I heard, that's all.
I mean, I think that building's planned to be done within the next 4 years or so.
That's the alarming part to me.
In the next 4 years.
That's what we do all day, every day, is either confirm or just tell rumors.
Yeah, well, before I spread it, I thought.
Jimmy Craigler said BRT is coming to Canada.
Yeah, but that goes back to the pace of development, outpacing the infrastructure.
Any plans about CN Redway you guys bought a couple years back?
Yeah, well, I shouldn't say this plan, right? I should say
Or
there.
2050?
So-
2050?
I have inquired multiple times, and Cyril can confirm that I raise this at every budget meeting I have with him there. Councillor Curry is on board with this as well, because it goes into her ward, crosses at I don't make this to Quebec, so it's a pretty neat resource for the city overall. I think it would make a great, multi-use pathway or some sort of way for people to bike into Canada without having to go on the road. If you can get to the end of that, so that pops up by the Brook Street, then you're in the bike lanes and you can get into the NCC network of trails, which can bring you all over the National Capital Region. So I think it would be very fun to have that.
On a personal note, my daughter asked me, because we used to live by the sports bikes, and we could bike to my parents in those corners, friends in Barhaven, like nice long trip. She asked me the other day, what if we don't have a bike ride yet? Where I'm at, we only got done on the road. I'm not putting like 9 done on the road on the bike.
I would like to.
Yeah, I biked on that, I know I trespassed, but I biked on that train track, the old train track. It's thick gravel, all you gotta do is put down some fine gravel, and good, they don't even need to pave it.
I think the challenges with that is that everybody wants to do it these days.
Yeah.
So snowmobilers, ATVs, cross-country skiers, bikers, walkers, runners. So I think there's a discussion to be had on what.
Keep an ATV if you want in the winter, and then in the summertime, be accessible by bike and walkers.
See, ATVs are one
You think of those, they can do anything.
Well, you're right, they do, but.
Who's stopping me?
Yeah, so that's anything that it's being discussed.
And that traffic light on the March Road development, 2035?
I wouldn't even want to fathom a guess on that. But I see an example, every time I drive it, I see an example of.
How's it not working? That's bananas.
Well, and they did a ton of work in that stretch for like a
Yeah,
year.
they look like they
And they wide, the shoulders are nice and wide, but they didn't expand the pavement.
My neighbor's kid, like, works at Sobeys, and they can't bike on that road because of people out close.
I honestly think there's going to be accidents through that stretch because people are, like I said, I've seen it, where people are waiting. When you start waiting 3, 4, 5 minutes to make a left-hand turn, you're going to start taking risks. And it's a really busy area with the school, the fire station. If we don't do something there,
Speaking of school, I assume with current trends, we're going to see a speed camera there.
The school's not in Ward 5.
Oh, okay, cool. That's the
Right before the school, like right at
Murphy Court.
Murphy Court, yeah. So that'd be a question for Kathy. But generally, that is where we're going, community safety zones, where there's a lot of traffic, pedestrians, schools.
If it's on time, fine. But during school time, school, but outside. So, sorry, I assume speed cameras bring a lot of revenue for the city. Yeah, that's scaling up.
Kind of intentionally, because it's kind of seeing a little bit of a dip. So it's doing what it's supposed to do in terms of change behavior. So we've seen a little bit of a contraction of it a little bit, which is kind of interesting. So even though we're adding more, people are starting to behave better.
I got two of those tickets. Now, is that like Bruce at 41?
Yeah.
Is there an annual maintenance on those? Like, do we don't pay fees on those? Okay. The city, province or something?
So we originally, all the tickets was over trauma, the process. And we were charged, I think it was like $80 a surcharge per ticket. In February of this year, we brought that back to the city. So we actually brought that in-house this year. So now it's managed by the city. So it brings in the revenue. So I think there's still a $5 or $10 surcharge because of
This is okay.
yeah.
But there is a discussion, and I even have a list of proposed areas where staff are considering putting on the next week cameras.
The one, and it's not your award, but it's not the new school, but but it's downhill.
Oh, it's Ontario Fox.
Yeah, so it's downhill, so you can grab 40, gravity's just gonna make you go 50.
It's 60 there now.
Oh, or whatever, but yeah.
So you're not, but that also trips people up, right? Yeah. One will be 60, another one will be 40. And
But the camera's pointing west.
There's a, what? I'm pretty sure. I don't know that.
The camera's pointing west. I saw the box is there now.
is it?
And those always catch the rear plate. I know from experience. And so you would be going west. It's actually, you're coming from the light second line and you're going slowly uphill.
Right, the picture I received in the mail the other day was the rear plate as well.
Yeah, so.
Keep it up.
I'm not going to complain about it. I'm just going to pay it. I was thinking. He was absent-minded, so it wasn't like terrible or something.
That's a great headline for you.
Yeah. I was swearing the whole time.
Yeah, that it is.
Okay, well, if there are no more questions or comments, I will thank everyone for taking the time to come out. I would urge you, if there's anything that you wanted to say, or if there's something that comes to mind tonight while you're falling asleep, if you didn't get out tonight, give me a call or an email. We can also talk about if there are committees that you want to present that, Ken, or anyone else who wants to do that. Talk to me first. I would love to be there when you do that. I can ask you questions that you want to be asked. I can follow up in any which way you would like to do. So we can work together on that. And other than that, I wish you a wonderful evening and a safe drive home.